Of that book, you say renegades, as you called them, played as much of a role in terms of liberty as the founders?
In terms of establishing personal liberty, freedoms that we all enjoy every single day, at least most Americans do, I say you should look to people who were drunks and prostitutes and slackers, actually, in the era of the founding of the Republic. They did establish a lot of the freedoms that we now cherish, including the weekend, leisure, time away from work, drinking when we want to. And the founders were actually quite puritanical and all opposed to that.
They were against premarital sex, loose women, drinking and dancing?
Not just premarital sex, but non-marital sex. The Founding Fathers issued lots of books and pamphlets and speeches saying that people should only have sex with their married spouses. They denounced a very libertine culture that was in the streets of early Philadelphia, early New York, early Boston, in which...
And why is that bad? You could say families do better when people don't have extramarital sex.
If you are a Christian conservative, yes, absolutely. I think that many Americans are not. Many Americans do value the ability, the right to have sex outside of marriage, and certainly most practice that. So I think that's a freedom that's quite widespread now and popular, but it was not embraced by the Founding Fathers.
Now, the Founding Fathers, on their behalf, while they criticized these things, they used words. They didn't say we should pass laws against these things.
That's an excellent point. The Founding Fathers rarely, if ever, called for state enforcement of this morality that I'm talking about.
But the states went further and did pass laws.
The states, with the founding of the Republic, did listen to the Founding Fathers and did enshrine a lot of their ideas, their puritanical morality, in particular laws.
And they locked women up who misbehaved?
They established reformatories in many of the states in which they brought not just prostitutes, but women who were accused of loose morality, women who simply had sex outside of marriage, put them in these reformatories, taught them how to cook and sew and clean and be mothers and wives. Yeah.
Put them in against their will.
Against their will in many cases, yes. And there are many cases of the women actually scaling the walls and escaping.
The founders were against interracial sex.
Generally, I mean, they were against sex that was not respectable, that was not man, woman, both white, or in some cases both black.
They spoke out against masturbation.
Believe it or not, there was a huge industry in the early 19th century for devices that stopped people from masturbating. There was something called a hobble that kept women's legs together, and all sorts of mitts that were locked to your hands that kept you from masturbating. And Benjamin Rush was one of the Founding Fathers, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He wrote many books about just that. He said we should not masturbate. It is a waste of time. We should be devoting ourselves to industrious labor. Well, not a lot of fun, those guys.
They were disgusted by urban saloons. They talked about debauchery, interracial mixing, and they were upset that women were running them?
Yeah, if you were to walk down the street of any major American city in the late colonial period, you would see a saloon and a brothel on just about every single corner. And in those saloons was this tremendously freedom-loving culture that actually gave rise, in many ways, to the Revolution, the Boston Massacre. The people who attacked the British soldiers in Boston during that night were drunks. They came running out of the saloons in Boston. Every historian agrees that they were dead drunk. They threw horse manure at the soldiers. They cursed at them. They were called the rabble. And John Adams actually defended the soldiers in the ensuing trial, not the Americans who fought them.
In your book, you argue that in terms of freedom of women, prostitutes did more for women than feminists.
There were dozens of freedoms that prostitutes established, pioneered in the 19th century, long before feminists even took up the fight. So, for instance, wages. The lowest paid prostitutes in that era made, on average, 5 times what white male construction workers made. Prostitutes in that era were the first women to own large pieces of property and real estate. There were madams in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Seattle who owned large parts of those cities. They were not only the wealthiest women in the country, they were among the wealthiest people in the country.
They were the first to walk alone in public.
It was not okay for a respectable woman to walk alone in public without a male chaperone. Throughout the 19th century, prostitutes were the first to do that, and most importantly, they did it with no shame. So they established that idea that it's okay for women to do that.
First to apply cosmetics, first to defend themselves with pistols.
To wear makeup, to color your hair, to wear brightly colored clothes was the symbol of the whore in the 19th century. A woman simply did not go in public wearing those things unless they were a whore. It was not okay. Prostitutes, of course, were the first to do that. By the early 20th century, it became more and more respectable, so that by the 1920s, the first ladies of the United States were wearing the hairstyles and the colors and the cosmetics that were pioneered by prostitutes. The symbol of prostitution, the symbol of prostitution at the time, was the red dress. Well, what is the red dress associated with now? The first ladies. Every first lady since Nancy Reagan has been very proud of their red dress. That actually was established by prostitutes in the 19th century.
I thought it was just a color.
It was known, it is just a color, but then it was known as the scarlet shame of the streetwalker.
And first to defend themselves with pistols.
Almost every madam, especially in the boom towns of the West and in large cities in the West, owned a pistol or several pistols, and they gave guns to their employees. And they used them. They not only hired police to protect them, then when they didn't have that protection, they used the guns on their own. Now, of course, was not okay for a woman to do in respectable society. So, again, they pioneered that freedom for women to protect themselves with no assistance from men. They, in many ways, were the very first feminists.
Now, you used to be a professor at Barnard College,
Yep.
part of Columbia University here in New York.
Yes.
And you apparently could say all those things you've said so far without a problem, but then you got fired because of what you said about civil rights leaders?
Yeah, and one of the major parts of my actual primary research was on the civil rights movement. And what I found was that the civil rights leaders of the time, especially Martin Luther King, but many others, were very critical of black culture. And Martin Luther King made many sermons saying that blacks are lazy, that they're promiscuous, sexually promiscuous, that they gamble too much, that they drink too much. He was very, very critical of African Americans and their culture.
Martin Luther King called rock and roll evil, degraded.
Yeah. He called out rock and roll, which of course was a product of black culture very much, basically a product of Satan, and told his constituents to reject it. He didn't even mention jazz until well into the 1960s. He would only talk about classical music.
He attacked homosexuality.
He did, very much so. They all did. There were several ministers, black ministers, who were enormously popular in the 1940s and 1950s among ordinary black people, who were pretty much openly gay, quite flamboyant, and the civil rights leaders attacked them relentlessly and really replaced them in the black press and in the mainstream and in the public consciousness.
And you say that one of the tipping points of the civil rights movement, the Birmingham riots, happened, well, you tell it.
So in 1963, several hundred people participated in the nonviolent protest organized by the movement. What's often not reported is that many thousands of other people who were not peaceful at all came to that protest and threw rocks and bottles and bricks at the police. And Martin Luther King, in his famous letter from Birmingham jail, said to the establishment of Birmingham, if you don't deal with me and my Christian peaceful people, you're going to have to deal with them. And within 2 days, the Birmingham establishment signed an agreement desegregating downtown Birmingham and all the stores in it. And so the argument I make is that without those violent people, those disorderly, bad people, there might not have been desegregation, at least as early as it was in Birmingham. But Martin Luther King made the very same argument himself.
And Columbia University fired you for teaching this.
Essentially, yeah. I never got a straight answer. The answer I got was that my argument lacked evidence. But then I had colleagues later tell me in private that it was really the politics of what I was preaching was very different than the standard left liberal politics that's in academia. And that people like Martin Luther King are really sacred for those people. It's very difficult to be critical of Martin Luther King and the leaders of the civil rights movement and of feminists and of labor leaders and all the people I attack in my book in academia and still have a job.
And finally, the anti-war movement. I thought this is courageous people who are just against the war.
Since Obama's election, I have seen, or we have all seen, basically the complete disappearance of any anti-war movement in this country. Obama is expanding the war in Afghanistan that Bush began. He's not doing much, really, to de-escalate the war in Iraq that Bush began.
So all this protest was not about war, it was about hating Bush?
During Bush, the left went crazy. The left was in the streets, or at least they called him all these names, and there was, this incredible hatred of Bush. Well, where is that now? Why are we treating the new president any differently?
Because the war's over.
On those issues. Oh, really? We'll ask the people in Pashtun who are being bombed daily.
Thank you, Thaddeus Russell, author of A Renegade History.